Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to the Cultural Studies podcast. My name is Toby Miller, and my guest today is
Doris Sommer. I'm the director of the Cultural Agents Initiative at Harvard University, and my pay job is as a professor of Latin American literature.
and we're old friends who probably haven't seen one another for getting on for 20 years, maybe more. So for me, it's an extraordinary privilege to see you, Prof. Doris, not only because you're an old friend I've not spoken to for a long time, but also because of your distinction. Despite that distinction, you are going to have to field my banal standard query, Prof, which is what's currently dynamizing, impeding, interesting, preoccupying you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. It's the only thing I've been thinking about, really, Toby. So I don't have to look for a response. Maybe I have to look for an answer. But my response is the demise of the humanities as a field. Why is this important for everyone? Because the humanities are the field that ignited higher education, public higher education at the beginning of the 19th century, because the Humboldt brothers understood that people would have to be universal citizens, cosmopolitan citizens. So they'd better study languages, literatures, culture, music, to make understandable bridges and connections among people. Of course, the humanities begin much earlier in the classical period. We imagine that classical education was not progressive. Antonio Gramsci says, on the contrary, it was very progressive. The only problem is that it was limited to an elite. But it was about a general formation of the human being. It was not a technical education. Today, people are so driven by economic need and greed and the need to get answers right, that they're not patient with or interested in process. The humanities are all about process, about interpretation, about variation, about different points of view, about disinterested thinking, which leads to judgment. Without those skills, without disinterested thinking, multiple points of view, interpretation, improvisation, can we imagine reviving the democracy? Does the democracy not depend on those skills? Is it not a protocol that looks very close to the protocol in humanistic studies? So here I'm channeling not only Immanuel Kant's third critique on aesthetic judgment, but Hannah Arendt's very cagey reading of that book, because she said, Kant, as an old man, 90 years old, was too smart to get himself in jail. He was a liberal. The king's spies were always watching him. He was not about to write a liberal treatise on politics. And Arendt says he didn't have to, because he wrote his aesthetics. And aesthetics does the work of politics. It appreciates surprise and the need for improvisation. It appreciates confusion because there are no previous concepts for surprise. So one has to speak with other human beings. And there you get the sociability and the dependence on consensus, on opinion. And finally, it rejects the simple thinking of reason. Reason is a one-track way of thinking. It's very important, but even in Kant's time, 300 years ago, it was threatening to walk all over sociability and consensus making. So this is where aesthetics becomes urgent as a mission in our teaching and in our messaging to citizens who are worried about the democracy. That's what really is gripping me today, because even inside the university, inside humanities programs, you may have felt this. I'd like to know if you have, that there's no articulation of this correlation or dependence, mutual dependence on humanistic education and the democracy. What do you think?
Well, I've actually gone back to Kant very much recently and rethought it, and I'm now a much bigger fan than I was 20 years ago, when the sexism, the anti-Semitism, these elements were there, but they don't necessarily color everything. I mean, I found out the other day, Prof, that apparently there's a footnote somewhere where David Hume, whom I've loved since I was an undergrad, endorses slavery. But we're not necessarily making audits of these men either as humans or in terms of the totality of their thought. It's where there are insights we can use that I think there's something important. And sorry, long-winded answer, but this takes me to your brilliant work from just over a decade ago, The Work of Art in the World, where you walk into the office of a very, very powerful man, someone who had been Deputy Secretary to the Treasury, I think, and then maybe Secretary to the Treasury, who was then president of Harvard and was taking a scythe to anything that stank of feminism, Marxism, etc. One Lawrence Summers, whom you refer to affectionately as Larry in the book, and you present him with a problem and invite him to answer it in his economistic terms. That story, which I'd love for you to retell if you would, is something that I try to do when confronting the very dilemma that you've just explained to us. Could you take us back to those difficult days when Larry was running Harvard?
Yeah, thank you very much. That was a very satisfying moment for us because Larry had the answers for everything in areas where he was expert and in other areas as well. And so I confronted him with the dilemma that faced the newly elected mayor of Bogota, Colombia in 1995. What to do in a city that was so corrupt, so violent, so chaotic, that no one knew where to start. And I said, well, what would you do, Larry? We all called him Larry.
Okay.
The entire faculty did. What would you do? And he thought out loud. He said, well, economic investments wouldn't really work because the money would probably go to drug traffickers one way or another. I said, right, that's true. And he said, well, maybe more police on the street wouldn't work either because they're in cahoots with the drug traffickers, and you put more guns in people's hands and you get more violence. I said, that's really true, Larry. So what would you do? And he said something that none of us had heard him say. And that is, I don't know.
These were words that would not have come easily to the big man.
No, they did not come easily. And I think they even surprised him. But I told him what the newly elected mayor of Bogota did. After a month of being in office and encouraging his cabinet to come up with some proposal to limit the number of traffic deaths because people were dying in crashes on the street very frequently, no one came up with any good proposal. And so a month later, after election, the Secretary of Culture came to his office and said, boss, there's nothing to be done in this city. This was a city where if your child didn't have his own personal bodyguard, he didn't go to school. So anyone with that kind of money had left Bogota anyway. It was really an impossible city. Nothing to be done in the city. It's time to bring out the clowns. And Mayor Mokus, because he's clever, decided not to be offended from what was obviously a jab at him. And he said, let's try it. Let's try it. So very soon afterwards, they fired 20 police officers, traffic police, in the center of the city where many of the deaths were happening. And they didn't have to find profiles of appropriate people to fire. Everyone was corrupt, basically. And they put 20 pantomime artists on the street to direct traffic with absolutely no authority to do it. They couldn't give fines. They couldn't write down names. They couldn't do anything official. And the journalists were very skeptical. They said, this is ridiculous. This isn't going to work. And Moko said, let's see what happens. And what happened is exactly what happened with you, Tovi. You laughed. People started to laugh on the street and to look at each other laughing and to enjoy the fun of watching a mime make fun of a jaywalker and having the jaywalker laugh along and feel really embarrassed and swear to himself or herself that they would never do that again. Because Bogota is a city of really, uptight people. The people on the coast are called costeños because, they're part of a Caribbean culture. But the people in the highlands in Bogota are pretty stiff. This is the Athena of Colombia. And to see these people make fun of each other and enjoy watching each other on the street was the icebreaker. After that, Mokus got lots of proposals from local artists about what he could do there and what he could do the other place. And he brought those proposals to his little cabinet, and they came up with some very good programs. For example, a young painter recommended to the cabinet that they paint fleeting stars that look something like crosses in black and yellow, police colors, police control colors, on the street everywhere someone died in a traffic accident. And when you walked on the streets of Bogota and saw one star painted on top of another, near another, that's painted on top of another, you got the point. That was a very successful campaign too. So what Mokus taught us is really aesthetic judgment. It's not only important to create art, but to recognize it in collective arenas, in public. Judgment never happens alone. He says it's ridiculous to say, I judge that something is beautiful. It always happens together. And in modern times, it happens together with statistical backup. So Mokus became very popular and very effective. In 1 year, traffic deaths were reduced by 51%. And that project lasted for 2 years, and then it didn't work anymore. And so some skeptics, some conservatives said, well, you see, it doesn't really work. But that's saying that art needs to have a lasting effect. To me, it's like saying that food doesn't work because you can eat one day and feel hungry the next. It's part of a human process. We are creative beings. You'll remember from that book that Friedrich Schiller is another mentor that I take very seriously.
Mm.
A play drive. We have a Spieltrieb. That's what makes us human. So thank you for remembering that page.
Oh, not at all. It's a problem with Los Cachacos. They don't like smiling or laughing for too long. But it's interesting because Medellin went through something rather similar in dealing with its murder rate.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about Gramsci, whom you mentioned earlier. You and at least one co-author talk about some kind of oscillation between Weber and Gramsci And you don't do it saying we're experts on Weber and we're experts on Gramsci. You do it to make a point about, using Weberian language, an ideal type one could manufacture of Max, an ideal type one could manufacture of Antonio. And a side point to people who are not from Latin America, this may sound like it's just academics talking. In Latin America, the idea of the national popular is something that politicians talk about, and trade unionists talk about, and activists talk about. And people cite Gramsci and they cite Benjamin. It's not like in the Anglo world, is it, Prof? It is a bit different here. So let me ask you about that opposition you have drawn between a sort of slightly dour, negative Weber and an imprisoned but positive Gramsci.
Yeah, thank you. My co-author there is Pierluigi Sacco, who is an economist of culture. That is a field in Europe. I don't think it's really a field in the United States. Economists of culture had an international meeting somewhere. I think it was in Indiana. And I said, really? Do we exist here? And the answer was more like getting a jump start in the United States. It sounds like two fields that don't really go together. But Sacco has many essays where he talks about the economic impact of culture. That's very well studied. What he's really focused on now is the behavioral impact of culture. Not to say political, he says behavioral. Very much in a Gramsci vein, you know? To make the revolution, we have to change our behavior, our ambition, our expectation. Because without a behavioral change, without a change of heart, we don't know where we're going. Desire moves politics, right? In that essay, what we basically say, and the first draft or two of that essay was by myself, and Sacco beefed it up with real economic thinking and citations. But the core of that essay is to say that Gramsci eats Weber. Gramsci knows Weber, and Gramsci eats Weber the way that the Cannibalist Manifesto eats every European source possible. You know, from the South, where you have nothing, you can just take from anyone. And what Gramsci knows how to take from Weber is a warning. What stuns me about Weber's book is that it's a warning against selling our souls, against giving up feeling, against closing off that window of pleasure. And it's read as if it were a manual to sell our souls and close the window of pleasure. So what Gramsci, I think, appreciates about Weber is the respect for pleasure, for interpretation, for sociability, and the danger of the iron cage. Yeah.
And this rationalization of everything that, as you point out there, and I think maybe other places too, was a description and the creation of a typology by Weber, but has been taken as an endorsement and a prescription all too often. Yeah,
exactly. But the description was, in fact, a warning. Don't you remember the passages where he says, England, you still have a window open. Don't let it close. You know, because English versions of Protestantism are not Calvinist, basically. And modernity has a very strong, deep Calvinist spine.
Mm. Yes, I mean, one of the great things about being British is that you can say words like bum or bottom and everybody laughs.
Right.
And there's actually, the thing I've found, a sense of irony in British humor that meets a lot of Jewish humor in the United States, not a lot of other white humor in the US, but really resonates with people in Mexico, in Colombia, really right across Latin America.
Yeah, no, it's like OPT, oppressed people's time, oppressed people's humor,
Mm,
right? Uh, I don't know if you know Freud's book on humor and its relation to the
mm,
unconscious, but
mm,
there he theorizes very well what racism and oppression gift to the sense of humor, um, because you're always with one foot in, one foot out, one eye
mm.
looking forward, the other askance. So you get the ironies. Exactly. I don't know why British humor should be part of oppressed people's humor. Why
Well,
do you think?
I've got a theory about that because, as you say, the British are the greatest oppressors in world history. I don't think there's any other way of understanding that. I mean, not in a compressed form like Nazi Germany or a less compressed form like the Soviet Union, but over the centuries, in terms of the breadth and depth of oppression, there's nothing like it. I think it's about class and the oppression of class domestically.
Mhm.
And that's where there's a link.
I see.
But that said, Prof, I want to not indict you at all, but express my immense appreciation of being pragmatic with the humanities. Because what I didn't know until recently was that you're a scientist, you're a medical humanist, you're a statistician, you're an ethnographer. You've published all these enormously influential and potent articles with, 17 authors in science journals that are about showing Larry and his kind the utility of the humanities and moving away from Kant, Schiller, Weber, Gramsci. These, I think, 4 or 5 articles in the last few years that you've collaborated on are extraordinary. Could you tell people about them, please, Prof?
Thank you. Yeah. Uh, isn't it interesting that we humanists don't publish collectively, right? We talk about collaboration, but we need to sign our articles by ourselves, and our tenure committees are very nervous when there are even 2 signatures.
Mm-hmm,
Which part did you write?
mm-hmm.
They say. And yet the best work is done collaboratively, obviously. Um, here's here's my brief for utility. If we follow Schiller's uh, reading of the human condition as creative, one could interpret that human life is improvisational.
Mm.
I had an interesting conversation with a dean at the Catholic University in Santiago, Chile, very distinguished university, very lovely dean. And he said, I understand your work in cultural agents and pretext. We were talking about pretext specifically, but I really don't get what art does there. Because pretext is a program in critical literacy and citizenship, but it works through the arts. And I said, what I want to rehearse again with you, that human life is improvisational. What does that mean? That we face new situations all the time, and we have to make up responses to them, not only adjust to them, but respond to them. When we respond and simply don't follow orders or patterns which don't allow us to improvise, and that's where we get stuck, and we could become fascist as well. When the answers pre-exist our responses, we're not taking advantage of the human condition. But when we do, when we respond creatively, what does that amount to? Schiller would say it amounts to art. Art is a creative response to a crisis. And a crisis can be minor or major, but uh, not being able to pick up your kid on time from school, what do you do then? Whom do you call? How do you speak? These are improvisational moments that we face every day. I'm cooking something and an ingredient is missing. Do I substitute? Do I leave it out? We make these decisions every day. And when we learn literacy through the arts, we get used to improvising, to making beautiful solutions from limited, limited conditions and resources. Here's my best lesson about limitation. And this I learned from Antanas Mokus too, because I had the honor of teaching with him for a semester.
Wow.
And he made me read rational choice theory. I read Jon Elster with him, for example. Jon Elster has a book called Ulysses Unbound. I don't know if you know this book.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, look, the only way to be rational is to have limited selections. If you go to a restaurant that has 6 pages of tightly typed words, you say, apple pie and coffee, please, or steak and fries. You can't read 6 close pages of menu. But if it has 6 selections with some detail, you think about it, right? He says, if you want to get the best examples of rational choice through self-limitation, think about what artists do. A painter will decide what colors he or she uses before they start. They'll decide what size a canvas or a piece of cardboard will be. He loves the example of Georges Perec, who wrote an entire novel without the letter E in French. What an accomplishment. Anyone who's tried to write a sonnet knows that that's a constraint that almost chokes you, but when you finish, you say, wow, I did that. So constraint is a condition of good improvisation. And that I learned from rational choice theory. So I guess what I want to say is that the utility of the arts is hard baked into quotidian life. And if we can use humanistic classrooms to train that capacity for interpretation and improvisation, then we have resources for other, maybe more difficult situations.
There's a colloquial Latin American expression which Colombians love, echa la ley, echa la trampa.
Right.
Which is a bit like, really, it's about langue and parole in semiotic terms, but they made the law, they made the loophole, if you like. And this is very much about making do. And it's the capacity to improvise in just the way that you've so artfully described. And in your science journal articles of, I guess, probably the last 4 or 5 years, would that be right? This shows how this kind of pragmatism, but also improvisation, can affect medical outcomes, for example,
Right.
in inverted commas, behavioral outcomes. I mean,
Right.
an array of things. So you've managed to talk to people who have a different language from you in English, but show them how some of the things that you know about can work with what they know about. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, I hope that that's true. But I want to go back to echa la ley, echa la trampa, because it's more than improvisation, it's corruption. What you're describing is corruption.
Yes.
And that's not working within the limitations, it's exceeding the limitations. Because if the limitation is the law, if you undermine that limitation, if I have a menu that gives me 6 options and I say, I want a 7th, right? That's not respecting the limitation. So I know that the long history of colonial subjugation in Latin America has made alternate codes seem respectable. But the challenge that Latin America has now is to develop a love for the law,
No, point taken. I guess the thing that a lot of people would say is that in the Colombian context, the FARC, the Paras, the Narcos have something in common with all of us, which is having to make do with complex resources or the complex
Right.
allocation of resources.
Right.
That's what I was driving at. But
I know.
I
I
don't
know,
want to
but you've
romanticize it. And I take
okay, but you've specifically targeted extra legal organizations. I'll tell you the only dirty word in Antanas Mokos's vocabulary. It is shortcut, making do, getting around things, not following the law. Atajo is the only bad word because if you don't respect the law just for the law itself, knowing that it's artificial. Art and artifice are the same words, right? Knowing that it's artificial, respecting it simply because it gives you a platform, a transparent platform to relate to other people, we won't have a chance for real self-government. There will be loopholes. There will be ways around law.
And of course, the law itself is malleable and can be changed in its form, its composition, and its interpretation by people working around it. Think about the US Constitution as an example. But I do take your point, and that leads me on to what I'd like us to finish with, which is to talk specifically about your work on Latin America, and in particular Latin American literature, because you have written books and articles, you've edited books that have been really path-breaking in terms of particular writers, but also in terms of our understanding of the North, South, Central America. And I wondered, without asking you to summarize that extraordinary corpus of work, if you could give perhaps to people who may not be reading much Latin American literature a sense of its diversity and the sense of fulfillment that it's given you as reader and critic. Would that be okay to ask?
That's again a very generous invitation, Toby. But what I would like to say before I answer about literature is what I've learned from Latin America as a pedagogue. What I do during most of my time outside of Harvard is a program called Pretexts, Pretextos. And we do it in every part of the world you can imagine. I had a colleague from India here talking to the Dominican. What Pretext does is collect practices that I have learned in Latin America as the most rigorous and friendly pedagogy you can imagine. We take any text, and read it out loud while people are making things. That comes from the tobacco factories all over the Caribbean. Why aren't we reading out loud to people who want to hear Shakespeare? You know, people forget why Romeo and Juliet is the name of a brand of cigars. It's because the workers wanted to hear Shakespeare. And then another brand is Monte Cristo. And Karl Marx used to be a brand. Labor unions began in tobacco factories, including in the United States. I don't know if you know that that the first labor union is the United Cigar Workers Union.
I didn't know that.
In the United States, yeah. So we start with reading out loud, which is a good Caribbean practice. And then everyone asks questions of the text. That's the second step. We've made a protocol for teaching. And that idea of making a protocol for art is what I learned from Augusto Boal, who made Freire land for us by turning Freire's philosophy into a protocol for theater. Okay, so the second step in pretext is everyone asks a question of the text. That is an exercise of many points of view, of inclusion, of difference. We ask anonymous questions, and then we adopt a question to respond to it. The third step is to make art from the text, to translate the text into a dance, a mural, a cuentacuentos. What a beautiful tradition in Latin America. And you can take any text from astrophysics to politics to, art history and do a cuentacuentos with it. No?
Totalmente.
Right? And then the fourth step is to reflect on what we did, the talk back, the cooling out and reflecting together. That's aesthetics for Kant. Aesthetics, as you remember now that you've reread him, is a second order pleasure. It's when we think about that first impact and do it collectively. So we do the fourth step. What did we do? What did we do? What are we thinking? And the fifth final step is go off on a tangent. That's the only one I invented because all of my teachers told me not to. And that's a way of saying, don't be curious, don't read on your own, right? Go off on a tangent. Bring something to the next session that connects with our text. And we make reading into a pleasurable adventure. So that's what I do with my time. I want to say that publicly because anyone who wants to do pretext with me is a partner, and I want to do it with them. We work with ministers of education, we work with schools, we work with teachers, because our children, and this connects with the scientific work that you were talking about, our children in schools are depressed, anxious, they have suicidal tendencies, because I think in part because we distinguish between socio-emotional education and cognitive work. We shouldn't distinguish. Classical education, paideia, didn't distinguish. It was just meant for elite people. But Montessori, who developed her work in the slum in Rome, knew what formation was. She got everything together. And we do a light version of her work. But I know time is coming to a close. I'll just say something about Latin America. Latin America taught me how nations are made. They're made through passion. You remember Benedict Anderson's argument about nationalism. It's not an ideology, it's a passion. And the way the passion is constructed is through national novels. I'm not sure if these national novels are better or worse than other national novels, but they were my entry into understanding how modernity is artificially constructed through imagining boy meets girl over warring sectors in a country, and how readers are trained to desire their union.
One of the other things in the Imagined Communities book by Ben Anderson is the concept of meanwhile.
Yes.
And it's possible through the use of the word meanwhile in literature or newspapers to realize there are people I've never met, never will meet, but are like me in some way. That this temporal notion is crucial for building nations, for bringing people together.
That's right. Now, he borrowed that concept from Benjamin, right? Because Benjamin was a defender of the notion of time. The fascists had abolished time. We'd already reached perfection. They were in love with symbols, not with allegories or narratives. The sun was the sun and Hitler was Hitler, and you didn't have to know anymore. But Benjamin was defending a time and how we live through time. And meanwhile works in novels, Toby. Tell me if it works in epics. In epics, you have one hero who does this and that and the other thing, and you don't care about the meanwhile. It's in novels that you have complicated plots and subplots and off to the side and tangents that you get an idea of a weave, a social weave, where we sometimes meet, sometimes don't. This is the Bakhtinian lesson, right? That novels are the complex platform for modernity because lots of things are happening simultaneously.
Now, without asking you to give a reading list, could you propose to the neophyte listening or the person revisiting their youth some great stuff to read? I'm thinking one of the writers you write about is Cortázar.
Oh, my favorite. Yeah, anything Cortázar wrote is worth reading and rereading. I'm not putting Hopscotch at the top of my list. He was I think a more talented story writer
Yeah.
than novelist. But his stories are haunting. If anyone is a jazz fan, or allows themselves to be seduced to be a jazz fan, read The Pursuer. Do you remember The Pursuer? A homage to Charlie Parker, where time is the leitmotif. How do you make time last, and how do you compress it? That's what jazz allows him to do. And what he does in that story is really theorize what the whole Latin American boom was as a moment of improvisation. Here we come back to improvisational thinking. He says, what happened 10 years after World War II? People put themselves together in ways that are innovative and disruptive and hard to follow. So you get cool jazz, you get Charlie Parker.
Yeah.
You get stuff that you can't really follow. And that's what happens in the experimental novels in the boom, right? You appreciate a novel that's so hard you don't understand it. We have less patience for that now. But if you remember reading I the Supreme, Yo el Supremo, or other novels, they're made to lose you. And you say, no, I'm going to get it, I'm going to get it. But they are challenging. So yeah, Cortázar, I just mentioned one of my favorite stories, but if you said any title of a story, I would say that's another favorite.
And bebop is definitely important in this, as you propose. Absolutely. I wonder if I could ask you one more question, Prof. And then after you've given your, I was going to say riposte, but answer, I'd like to give you the opportunity to close things by adding anything you wish. And that might take the form of going over terrain we've already traversed, where you've had another thought, or might be something where I've missed asking you a question I should have asked. So my last question is, Gabo, for me, the great figure for political reasons, maybe not the great stylist. Garcia Marquez, what's your take?
Oh, I would compliment your vision by the opposite. I think he's a great stylist, and as a political figure, a bit predictable. And in his later years, so sexist in his writing that he puts me off.
Yeah.
You know, there's a whole tendency in very mature male writers in Latin America of becoming the viejo verde, the dirty old man.
Yeah.
And I had a graduate student whom I almost convinced to write on this topic, and then she found a more pleasant one. But if you think about Garcia Marquez, Fuentes, Neruda, I don't know, men who have lasted beyond the age of 60 or more, they produce work that looks really pornographic, and it's a way of remaining sexy without doing much physically. So
Yeah.
Garcia Marquez, in his first stories and in 100 Years of Solitude, and even in in what's the dictator novel? El Otoño del Patriarca, is a great stylist. And what's great about him is that he manages to make high style from popular speech. Let me just give you one example.
Mm-hmm.
One example. With Pretexts, we did a workshop in Bogota with hip hop artists. And we were using the second chapter of 100 Years of Solitude, where Arcadio Buendía takes his children, Jose Arcadio takes his children to the fair, and they discover ice. You remember this chapter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the art project, step number 3 in our protocol, was to do a rap, a hip hop rap with that chapter. Everybody managed to do it. 4 beats, 4 rhymes, then the next stanza, and the next one. I was the only one who didn't do it. And I felt really stupid, really old, and useless, because I was the facilitator and I was the only one who wasn't producing. Because in Pretext, a facilitator just steps down after giving a prompt and becomes one of the participants. And then I started reading out loud in my head. You know how the chapter starts?
No.
Llevando los niños de cada mano para no perderlos en el tumulto. And I forgot the last line. But he's writing coplas. He's writing rap.
Yeah,
I didn't
okay.
have to do anything. But that's his charm. And some very great writers, including Garcia Lorca, and you can remember other names. Their charm is that they work very hard. Oh, Juan Rulfo is another one. And Juan Villoro,
Mm-hmm.
an important contemporary writer, has a beautiful essay on how Juan Rulfo makes literary artifice from material that looks and feels organic and simple, and is absolutely worked through artificially to give you that sensation of organicity. So that's where Garcia Marquez really grabs me.
And to wrap things up, Prof, is there anything you'd like to add? As I said, it could be something new, or it might be something that we've already touched on.
Just your calling me prof makes me, not resist telling you what my new project will be.
Adelante, porfa.
Okay. In Latin America, and our Latin American friends will recognize this, although they haven't necessarily articulated it. This is what my advantage of being an outsider for the foundational fictions. In Latin America, there is an entire tradition, country after country, of profes who've become political leaders. How many political leaders are called profe?
Well, think about all the Mexican presidents who did economics degrees at Yale.
Okay, they're intellectuals. They're intellectuals and they're licenciados, and some of them maestros, but some of them were teachers, not just university teachers. Look at Pedro Castillo in Peru. He made a noble effort to be president and he won. The right wing kicked him out, but as a 4th grade teacher and syndicalist of the teachers union, he became president of Peru in 2022. Okay, that's a kind of dramatic recent example. But my own mentor and friend, Antanas Mocus, do they call him profe? What about Sergio Fajardo in Medellin that you mentioned? Profe. Okay, so elected leaders as a continuation of pedagogical careers fascinates me. And that isn't true for other places in the world. It's a beautiful thread in Latin American political traditions that we haven't honored. We just talk about political leaders as corrupt or charismatic or caudillos. We don't talk about the profes. So I want to do that.
Wonderful. I'm very glad that I called you that at the critical moment.
You've been calling me that. I've enjoyed it.
I got in trouble actually in a recent podcast with a wonderful cachaca who is what we would call a profe in Britain, but there she is a lecturer.
Uh-huh.
So for her, it feels odd, despite being Colombian, to be designated as profe. So I had to stop myself. I had to hold back. I had to call her doctora.
Okay, but if maybe because as you say, she's cachaca and she cares about those fine distinctions. Profe, I learned talking to other Colombian friends, is an affectionate term that people use for soccer coaches,
Yep.
for for local community mentors. It's a term that combines respect and affection.
In Northern Europe, it can also be a fencing instructor, for example.
Okay,
They're
okay.
profes in Switzerland. Well, profe Sommer, it's so exciting to see you and to talk to you. Wow, did you hear that beautiful bird song just then? It was
No.
incredible. Wow. It's lovely to speak to you, lovely to learn from you as always. For those people familiar with your work, this won't come as a surprise. For anybody who's not, it's so rich. A lot of it you can find free and legitimately free on the internet. And I thank you very much for the time you spent with us today.
Thank you so much.